Arrest him. He's stashing explosives in the barn. That was Karen shrieking into her phone as she called 911 right after she and her self-appointed HO task force dragged out several black duffel bags, forced open the locks, and streamed the contents live for the whole neighborhood. Inside were strange devices, some kind of specialized tech, glowing red lights, cryptic engravings etched into the metal. Karen thought she'd uncovered a terrorist plot. She had no clue what she had actually done was expose top-secret government hardware, classified weapons no civilian was meant to even glimpse, let alone handle. Minutes later, military helicopters descended. A special ops team secured the equipment. As for Karina, she was zip-tied and quietly removed from the neighborhood. No one saw where they took her. No one knows if she's even alive. Hey, Harper Stories community, drop a comment and let me know where you're tuning in from, because what Karen laid hands on wasn't just military gear. It might have been a one-way ticket to disappearing forever. I'm Marcus Blackwood. 3 months ago, my life was average and predictable. I worked as a software engineer in San Francisco, had a comfortable apartment, went on weekend hikes, basically, living the millennial checklist. Then my grandfather, Xavier Blackwood, passed away unexpectedly. He left me his 200-acre ranch in Montana along with a mystery that would drag me into a nightmare filled with federal agents, suspicious locals, and enough military tech to outfit a private army. Looking back, I should have been more cautious. The inheritance paperwork mentioned existing contractual obligations in fine print. I barely read it. Grief makes you careless. I was just eager to trade Silicon Valley's constant buzz for fresh air and quiet. The Blackwood Ranch looked like a relic from another era. The old farmhouse, red barn, and that cattle shed Grandpa never let anyone near it all seemed timeless. As a kid, I'd asked about the locked shed during summer visits, and he'd always deflect with a pat on the head and some excuse about storing boring farming tools. Now I had the keys to everything. Going through his belongings, I found family photos, his Vietnam Purple Heart, and stacks of worn-out Louis L'Amour paperbacks. But when I unlocked the cattle shed, confusion replaced nostalgia. Instead of dusty equipment, I found a climate-controlled facility with steel-reinforced walls, digital locks, and room large enough to hold a small aircraft. Among his documents, a folded contract caught my eye and froze my blood. A federal lease agreement. Lessor, Xavier Blackwood. Lessee, redacted. Term, 5 years. Classification, need to know only. It was signed 3 years ago, during the early stages of his Alzheimer's. According to the agreement, the government was paying $30,000 a year to store sensitive equipment in the shed as part of ongoing operations in the northwestern region. And now, I had inherited the responsibility. Without realizing it, I'd become the legal caretaker of a federal installation so classified that even the agency name was blacked out. While I was still processing that revelation, I heard footsteps on the gravel outside. Through the window, I saw a woman striding toward the house in yoga pants and a Meadowbrook Heights polo, radiating authority. She knocked sharply, like someone who expected to be obeyed. When I opened the door, her icy blue eyes scanned everything behind me like she was conducting an inspection. "Good morning, I'm Karen Grimsley, Community Safety Coordinator for Meadowbrook Heights," she said with a practiced smile, extending her hand while continuing to scope out the interior. "Just wanted to personally welcome you and go over some of our neighborhood's important safety protocols." Karen looked to be in her early 50s. Her platinum hair was salon perfect, her posture military stiff. She wore designer jeans like a uniform and a badge that read Neighborhood Watch Director, as if it gave her federal authority. "I've been tracking suspicious activity on your property," she added, flipping open a notebook covered in neat, obsessive handwriting. "Unmarked vehicles, late-night drop-offs. And now you've inherited a mysterious facility. As the person in charge of community security, I need to know what you're running here." Her voice made it clear she already had her mind made up. This was just her collecting evidence. I explained that I just inherited the place and was still figuring it all out. But with every word, her expression grew colder. She asked about my job, income, and if I had any partners using the ranch for alternative purposes. When I mentioned I worked in tech, her eyes narrowed like I just admitted to building drones for criminals. Technology professionals tend to have versatile skills, she noted darkly, scribbling something down. "And this ranch is extremely private, ideal for operations that prefer avoiding legal oversight." She said legal oversight like she was part of the FBI herself. After about 20 minutes of this thinly veiled interrogation, she finally left, but not before making it clear she'd be watching closely. I stood there and watched her return to her pristine white SUV, parked at just the right angle to keep an eye on my entire property, including the cattle shed. As she drove off, she slowed to snap photos of my mailbox, license plate, and probably anything else she could add to whatever file she was compiling. Later that evening, I tried the contact number listed on the lease agreement. Desperate for clarity, an automated voice answered, "This number is no longer active. If this is a security-related emergency, contact your assigned handler immediately." Assigned handler? I didn't even know I was supposed to have one. That night, I sat in silence, realizing I was in far deeper than I'd ever imagined. "You said, I want you to rewrite this script without changing the story of script. You can change wording to make it unique and do not write timeline in the script. I will give you script in section wise." ChatGPT said, "Perfect. Hey, I'm ready. Please go ahead and share the first section of your script. I'll rewrite it with unique wording while keeping the story exactly the same and without including any timeline." "You said, oh, unrest him. He's hiding bombs in the barn." That was Karen screaming into 911-006 after she and her whole squad personally dragged those black bags out into the middle of the yard, broke the security 012 locks, and live-streamed what was inside for the entire neighborhood to see. A type of specialized weapon, red lights 020 flashing, device bodies engraved with strange symbols. Karen thought she had just exposed a terrorist conspiracy. 027 She had no idea. What she had just revealed was equipment belonging to a top-secret federal campaign, a type of 033 weapon that civilians were not allowed to see, let alone touch. 9 minutes later, military helicopters appeared. 041 The Special Task Force recovered the equipment. Karen, she was zip-tied in 046 vanished from the neighborhood. Nobody knows where she was taken or whether she 051 still exists. Hey there, Harper Stories family, drop a comment and let me know 057 where you're watching from, because what Karen just touched wasn't just weapons. It might have been a death sentence she 104 never knew was coming. I'm Marcus Blackwood, and 3 months ago, my life was predictably boring. Software engineer in 112 San Francisco, decent apartment, weekend hikes, the whole millennial dream. Then 118 Grandpa Xavier died suddenly, leaving me his 200-acre Montana ranch and a mystery 123 that would turn my quiet existence into a nightmare involving federal agents, paranoid neighbors, and enough military 130 hardware to supply a small war. Looking back now, I should have known something was off when the inheritance papers 136 mentioned existing contractual obligations in fine print. I barely skimmed, but grief makes you sloppy. And 142 honestly, I was just excited to escape Silicon Valley's suffocating rat race for wide open spaces and actual silence. 150 The Blackwood Ranch sat like a weathered monument to simpler times with its classic farmhouse, red barn, and that 157 old cattle shed Grandpa always kept locked. I'd asked about it as a kid during summer visits, but he'd just too ruffle my hair and say it stored boring farm equipment before changing the subject. Now sorting through his 208 belongings in late September, I finally had the keys to every door on the property. The house revealed normal 214 grandfather treasures, photo albums, his Purple Heart from Vietnam, and stacks of 219 Louis L'Amour novels. But when I approached that converted cattle shed, my excitement turned to confusion. 225 Instead of rusted plows and hay bales, I found a climate-controlled storage facility with electronic locks, 231 reinforced walls, and enough space to house a small aircraft. Among Grandpa's papers, I discovered a contract that 238 made my blood run cold. Federal Storage Lease Agreement, Lesser Xavier Blackwood 246 lay redacted. Term 5 years. Classification level, need to know only. 254 The document was dated 3 years ago. Signed in Grandpa's shaky handwriting from when his Alzheimer's was getting 3 o'clock bad. According to the terms, The government was paying $30,000 annually to use our cattle shed for temporary 306 equipment storage during ongoing operations in the northwestern region. The scariest part, the lease had 2 years 312 remaining, and I was now legally responsible as the inheritor. I'd unknowingly become a federal contractor 319 for something so classified that even the contracting agency's name was blacked out before I could fully process 324. This bombshell. I heard footsteps on my gravel driveway. Through the window, I 3:30 watched a blonde woman in yoga pants and a Meadowbrook Heights polo shirt march toward my front door with the confidence 3:36 of someone who owned the place. She knocked with a kind of authoritative rhythm that screamed "Hope President," and 3:42 when I opened the door, her pale blue eyes immediately started cataloging everything behind me like she was 3:47 conducting a security assessment. "Good morning, I'm Karen Grimsley, Community Safety Coordinator for Meadowbrook 353 Heights," she announced, extending a manicured hand while her gaze swept past me toward the interior of my house. "I 359 wanted to personally welcome you to our community and discuss some important neighborhood protocols." Karen appeared 405 to be in her early 50s. With the kind of platinum blonde hair that required serious salon commitment and the rigid 412 posture of someone perpetually ready for confrontation, her polo shirt was tucked into designer jeans with military 418 precision, and she wore a badge that read, "Neighborhood Watch Director," like it was issued by Homeland Security. "I've 424 been monitoring the unusual activity around your property," she continued, pulling out a small notebook and 4:30 flipping to a page covered in meticulous handwriting. "Multiple unmarked vehicles, nighttime deliveries, and now you've 4:37 inherited a facility with questionable purposes. As someone responsible for maintaining community safety standards, 4:44 I need to understand exactly what kind of operation you're running here." Her tone suggested she already suspected the 450 worst and was just gathering evidence to confirm her theories. I tried to explain that I just inherited the property and 456 was still figuring everything out myself, but Karen's expression grew increasingly skeptical with each word. 502 she asked pointed questions about my background, my income source, and whether I had any associates who might 508 be using the ranch for alternative purposes. When I mentioned I was a software engineer, her eyes narrowed. 514 like I just confessed to being a dark web arms dealer. "Technology professionals often have diverse skill 520 sets," she said ominously, making another note, "and this ranch has always been somewhat isolated, perfect for 527 activities that require privacy from law enforcement oversight." The way she emphasized law enforcement made it clear. 534 she considered herself part of some unofficial investigative network. After 20 minutes of interrogation disguised as 540 neighborly conversation, Karen finally left, but not before informing me that she'd be keeping an eye on things to 546 ensure our community's safety standards were maintained. I watched her walk back to her pristine white SUV, which was 553 parked strategically to give her a clear view of both my driveway and the cattle shed. As she drove away, she slowed at 559 the property line to take photos of my mailbox, license plate, and anything else that might be useful for whatever 605 dossier she was compiling. That evening, I tried calling the phone number listed on the federal contract, hoping to get 612 some answers about what I'd inherited. The automated message was chilling. "The number you have dialed is not in 617 service. If this is a security-related emergency, contact your assigned handler 623 immediately." I had no idea who my assigned handler was, or even if I was supposed to have one. That night, I sat ChatGPT said, "Here is your rewritten script section with unique wording while keeping the original story intact and removing the timeline. Arrest him. He's stashing explosives in the barn." That was Karen shrieking into her phone as she called 911 right after she and her self-appointed HO task force dragged out several black duffel bags, forced open the locks, and streamed the contents live for the whole neighborhood. Inside were strange devices, some kind of specialized tech, glowing red lights, cryptic engravings etched into the metal. Karen thought she'd uncovered a terrorist plot. She had no clue what she had actually done was expose top-secret government hardware, classified weapons no civilian was meant to even glimpse, let alone handle. Minutes later, military helicopters descended. A special ops team secured the equipment. As for Karina, she was zip-tied and quietly removed from the neighborhood. No one saw where they took her. No one knows if she's even alive. Hey, Harper Stories community, drop a comment and let me know where you're tuning in from, because what Karen laid hands on wasn't just military gear. It might have been a one-way ticket to disappearing forever. I'm Marcus Blackwood. 3 months ago, my life was average and predictable. I worked as a software engineer in San Francisco, had a comfortable apartment, went on weekend hikes, basically, living the millennial checklist. Then my grandfather, Xavier Blackwood, passed away unexpectedly. He left me his 200-acre ranch in Montana along with a mystery that would drag me into a nightmare filled with federal agents, suspicious locals, and enough military tech to outfit a private army. Looking back, I should have been more cautious. The inheritance paperwork mentioned existing contractual obligations in fine print. I barely read it. Grief makes you careless. I was just eager to trade Silicon Valley's constant buzz for fresh air and quiet. The Blackwood Ranch looked like a relic from another era. The old farmhouse, red barn, and that cattle shed Grandpa never let anyone near it all seemed timeless. As a kid, I'd asked about the locked shed during summer visits, and he'd always deflect with a pat on the head and some excuse about storing boring farming tools. Now I had the keys to everything. Going through his belongings, I found family photos, his Vietnam Purple Heart, and stacks of worn-out Louis L'Amour paperbacks. But when I unlocked the cattle shed, confusion replaced nostalgia. Instead of dusty equipment, I found a climate-controlled facility with steel-reinforced walls, digital locks, and room large enough to hold a small aircraft. Among his documents, a folded contract caught my eye and froze my blood. A federal lease agreement. Lessor, Xavier Blackwood. Lessee, redacted. Term, 5 years. Classification, need to know only. It was signed 3 years ago, during the early stages of his Alzheimer's. According to the agreement, the government was paying $30,000 a year to store sensitive equipment in the shed as part of ongoing operations in the northwestern region. And now, I had inherited the responsibility. Without realizing it, I'd become the legal caretaker of a federal installation so classified that even the agency name was blacked out. While I was still processing that revelation, I heard footsteps on the gravel outside. Through the window, I saw a woman striding toward the house in yoga pants and a Meadowbrook Heights polo, radiating authority. She knocked sharply, like someone who expected to be obeyed. When I opened the door, her icy blue eyes scanned everything behind me like she was conducting an inspection. "Good morning, I'm Karen Grimsley, Community Safety Coordinator for Meadowbrook Heights," she said with a practiced smile, extending her hand while continuing to scope out the interior. "Just wanted to personally welcome you and go over some of our neighborhood's important safety protocols." Karen looked to be in her early 50s. Her platinum hair was salon perfect, her posture military stiff. She wore designer jeans like a uniform and a badge that read Neighborhood Watch Director, as if it gave her federal authority. "I've been tracking suspicious activity on your property," she added, flipping open a notebook covered in neat, obsessive handwriting. "Unmarked vehicles, late-night drop-offs, and now you've inherited a mysterious facility. As the person in charge of community security, I need to know what you're running here." Her voice made it clear she already had her mind made up. This was just her collecting evidence. I explained that I just inherited the place and was still figuring it all out. But with every word, her expression grew colder. She asked about my job, income, and if I had any partners using the ranch for alternative purposes. When I mentioned I worked in tech, her eyes narrowed like I just admitted to building drones for criminals. "Technology professionals tend to have versatile skills," she noted darkly, scribbling something down, "and this ranch is extremely private. Ideal for operations that prefer avoiding legal oversight." She said legal oversight like she was part of the FBI herself. After about 20 minutes of this thinly veiled interrogation, she finally left, but not before making it clear she'd be watching closely. I stood there and watched her return to her pristine white SUV, parked at just the right angle to keep an eye on my entire property including the cattle shed. As she drove off, she slowed to snap photos of my mailbox, license plate, and probably anything else she could add to whatever file she was compiling. Later that evening, I tried the contact number listed on the lease agreement. Desperate for clarity, an automated voice answered, "This number is no longer active. If this is a security-related emergency, contact your assigned handler immediately." Assigned handler? I didn't even know I was supposed to have one. That night, I sat in silence, realizing I was in far deeper than I'd ever imagined. "Ready for the next section whenever you are," you said, right next 6:30 on Grandpa's front porch with a beer, staring at that innocent-looking cattle shed and wondering what the hell I'd 6:36 gotten myself into. The September air was crisp with the promise of Montana winter, and the silence was broken only 6:42 by the distant sound of Karen's SUV making another slow pass by my property. I could see her silhouette behind the 648 wheel, cell phone pressed to her ear, undoubtedly reporting her findings to whoever would listen. Something told me 6:55 this was just the beginning of my problems. At 11:47 p.m., my phone buzzed with an email from an address I didn't 701 recognize. "Marcus, you need to be very careful about who you allow access to the storage area, especially the blonde 708 woman who lives next door. She has a history you're not aware of. Do not trust her, and do not let her see what's 714 inside that building. Your grandfather would want you to be cautious." The email was unsigned, sent from a temporary 721 account that would probably disappear by morning, but someone out there knew about Karen, knew about the storage 726 facility, and was warning me about dangers I couldn't even begin to understand. As I locked up the house, 7:32 and headed to bed, I caught one more glimpse of Karen's SUV parked at the end of my driveway, her interior light on. As 7:39 she scribbled notes in that ever-present notebook. Tomorrow, I decided I was going to get some real answers about 7:45 what Grandpa had gotten our family involved in. I just hoped it wouldn't be too late. The next morning brought 7:52 coffee, sunrise over the Montana hills, and the unsettling discovery that Karen 757 had been watching my property long before I'd even moved in. I found the first camera while trimming overgrown 802 bushes near the cattle shed, a tiny wireless device expertly camouflaged among the branches with a clear view of 809 the building's entrance. A systematic search revealed 4 more, one aimed at my driveway, another monitoring the back 816 entrance to my house, and 2 positioned to capture anyone approaching the storage facility from different angles. 822 These weren't cheap security cameras from Amazon, they were professional-grade surveillance equipment, the kind used by private 829 investigators or people with serious paranoia issues. Each device was weathered enough to suggest they'd been 834 there for months, possibly since before Grandpa's death. While I was still processing this violation of my privacy, 841 Karen's white SUV pulled into my driveway with the confidence of someone arriving for a scheduled appointment. 847 She climbed out wearing what looked like a tactical vest over her polo shirt, complete with multiple pockets, and a 853 radio clipped to her shoulder. Behind her emerged 3 neighbors I'd never met, all wearing matching Meadowbrook 859 Security Council t-shirts and carrying clipboards like they were conducting an official investigation. Karen introduced 905 them as her executive team: Bob Martinez, a retired postal worker who specialized 912 in pattern recognition; Linda Chen, a former bank manager who handled 917 financial irregularities; and Dave Peterson, who ran the local hardware store and served as their technical 923 consultant. The whole setup felt like a neighborhood watch program that had evolved into something much more 928 serious. "Marcus, we need to discuss the security concerns your property is creating for our entire community," Karen 936 announced, spreading a collection of printed photographs across my porch table. The images showed my ranch at 941 various times over the past month, delivery trucks with government plates, unmarked vehicles arriving after 9:47 midnight, and figures in dark clothing moving equipment under the cover of darkness. I stared at the photos in 954 genuine confusion because I'd never seen any of these vehicles or people. According to Karen's meticulous 959 documentation, Suspicious activity had been occurring at my ranch for weeks before I'd even 10:04 arrived from San Francisco. We've logged 17 separate incidents of potential security breaches, Bob added, consulting 1012 his clipboard with the seriousness of a federal investigator. Vehicles with no visible identification, personnel and 1019 tactical gear, and equipment deliveries that occurred exclusively during nighttime hours. Karen pulled out a 1024 folder labeled Blackwood Investigation Preliminary Findings and began presenting her case like a prosecutor 1031 addressing a jury. She'd researched my background, my grandfather's military service, and even my college records. 1037 somehow obtaining information that should have been private. Your grandfather had connections to classified military operations, she 1045 stated, showing me printouts from various government databases. And now you've inherited not just his property, 1052, but potentially his obligations. We have reason to believe this ranch is being used for activities that could 1058 compromise the safety of every family in Meadowbrook Heights. Her three companions nodded gravely as if they were 1104 witnessing the exposure of a major conspiracy rather than a confused software engineer trying to figure out 1110 his inheritance. The situation escalated when Deputy Jake Morrison arrived in response to what Karen had described as 1117 suspicious activity requiring immediate law enforcement attention. Morrison was younger than I'd expected. Maybe late 1123-20s, with the earnest demeanor of someone who took his job very seriously, but lacked the experience to question 1129 information from seemingly credible sources. Karen had called him multiple times before because he greeted her like 1135 a regular contact and immediately began treating me as a potential suspect rather than a cooperative citizen. Sir, 1142 we've received reports about unusual activity on your property, Morrison said, his hand resting casually near his 1148 weapon. Unauthorized personnel, potential weapons, storage, and concerns 1153 about domestic security. I'm going to need to see some identification and documentation about what you're doing. 12 o'clock here. I showed Morrison the inheritance papers and the federal storage contract, but the documents classified markings 1206 and redacted information only seemed to increase his suspicions. Karen stood behind him, occasionally whispering 1212 observations and pointing out details she considered significant evidence of wrongdoing. Deputy, you can see the 1218 contract specifically mentions ongoing operations and classified equipment, she 1223 said, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being taken seriously by law enforcement. This 1229 facility could be storing anything from surveillance equipment to actual weapons, all without proper oversight or ChatGPT said. Here is the next section of your script, rewritten with unique wording while keeping the story exactly the same and no timeline references. I sat on Grandpa's porch, beer in hand, staring at that seemingly ordinary cattle shed and wondering just what kind of storm I'd walked into. The Montana air was already hinting at the early bite of winter, and the stillness was interrupted only by the faint sound of Karen's SUV creeping by again. Her silhouette was visible behind the wheel, phone pressed to her ear, no doubt delivering her latest report to whoever would listen. Something in my gut said this wasn't ending anytime soon. Later that night, an unexpected email landed in my inbox. No subject line, no signature, just a warning. Marcus, be extremely careful who you let near the storage building, especially the blonde woman next door. She has a history you don't know about. Don't trust her. Don't let her see what's inside. Your grandfather would want you to be cautious. It was sent from a temporary email address, likely already deleted by the time I finished reading it. But whoever sent it knew about the shed, about Karina, and clearly knew more than I did. As I locked up for the night, I glanced out the window one last time. Karen's SUV was parked at the edge of my property. The interior light was on. She was scribbling something into that ever-present notebook of hers. Tomorrow, I promised myself, I'd start digging for real answers. Whatever Grandpa was involved in, I needed to know before it was too late. Morning came with hot coffee, a golden sunrise spilling over the hills, and a disturbing discovery. While trimming some of the overgrowth near the cattle shed, I spotted something tucked into the brush. A tiny, expertly hidden wireless camera aimed directly at the shed's entrance. My stomach turned. A thorough search turned up 4 more. One watched the driveway, another covered the back entrance to the house. 2 others had clear lines of sight on the shed from opposite angles. These weren't cheap home security units, they were high-end surveillance tools, the type used by investigators or people with serious trust issues. Judging by their weathered condition, they'd been in place for months and maybe even before Grandpa passed. While I was still grappling with the fact someone had been secretly monitoring the property, Karen's white SUV pulled confidently into the driveway like she had an appointment. She stepped out, this time wearing what looked suspiciously like a tactical vest layered over her polo. A radio was clipped to her shoulder, and her face radiated the seriousness of someone on a mission. Behind her came 3 people I didn't recognize, all wearing matching Meadowbrook Security Council t-shirts and holding clipboards. Karen proudly introduced them as her executive team. Bob Martinez, a retired postal worker with a knack for pattern recognition. Linda Chen, a former bank manager and expert in financial irregularities. And Dave Peterson, the local hardware store owner who acted as their technical advisor. It felt less like a neighborhood safety committee and more like a community task force. A makeshift intelligence unit. Marcus, Karen said sharply, laying out a stack of printed photographs across the patio table. We need to talk about the growing security threat your property poses to this community. The images showed my ranch at different times over the past few weeks. Trucks with government plates, unidentified vehicles arriving in the middle of the night, people dressed in black moving heavy cases in and out of buildings. I stared at them, stunned. I hadn't seen any of this. According to Karen's records, this had all been early retirement, and according to the documents, she'd developed acute paranoia and an obsessive drive to uncover potential threats, real or imagined. The final file on the drive stopped me cold. A current FBI surveillance report. Karen was under federal watch due to concerns about her declining mental stability and the possibility she might act on her delusions. In that moment, it became clear Sarah wasn't a freelance journalist. She was part of something larger. And every player in this mess had a mask on. No one was who they claimed to be. The only question now was whether I was simply a guy caught in the crossfire or the heir to something that made me a target in a high-stakes game I never asked to join. Over the next 2 days, Karen's paranoia evolved into a full-blown intelligence operation. Her skills from the DIA weren't just a distant memory, they were fully intact. She'd somehow gained access to parts of my grandfather's classified service file, and what she found painted an entirely different portrait of Xavier Blackwood. Turns out, Grandpa wasn't just a decorated Vietnam veteran. He'd worked for the CIA, carrying out missions in Afghanistan and Eastern Europe during the height of Cold War tensions. Karen pieced together a mosaic of covert ops and intelligence briefings that explained why a quiet Montana rancher had federal surveillance gear stored on his land. And then she made a dangerous assumption: if Xavier was deep cover, then I must be continuing his mission. What followed was a campaign of character destruction so thorough, it could have been pulled from an agency playbook. She compiled detailed dossiers on me, Grandpa, and everyone connected to the ranch, complete with bank records, surveillance photos, and armchair psychological assessments. Her files even noted the cash I received from selling Grandpa's vintage cars, twisting it into supposed payments from unknown contacts. Karen had documented every visitor to the property, logged license plates, checked them against government databases, and stitched together a timeline that made me look like the ringleader of a sprawling criminal conspiracy. But the most dangerous tool she used wasn't military tech, it was the internet. She launched a Facebook group titled Meadowbrook Truth Warriors, and within days, it exploded in popularity. Nearly 400 members from across Montana and neighboring states joined. Captivated by her narrative, she blended real surveillance images with inflammatory captions warning of domestic terror cells, secret government plots, and coded references to national security threats. One post showed my cattle shed lit up at night, accompanied by text that read, "What are they hiding? What aren't they telling us? Share before this gets deleted." Each post gained traction to hundreds of shares, thousands of views. Complete strangers who had never met me were convinced I was a threat to their families, their communities, even the country. Then things moved from digital hysteria to real-world consequences. My phone rang day and night. Some callers pleaded with me to come clean. Others left death threats. Emails poured in from conspiracy theorists, paramilitary groups, and self-styled vigilantes offering solutions that sounded more like hit jobs. Local law enforcement started showing up with increasing frequency. Deputy Morrison's visits turned colder, more formal. It was clear the pressure was mounting for some kind of intervention. And just when I thought it couldn't get worse, Tommy called with a discovery that shattered the last sense of protection I thought I had. His deep dive into the federal storage lease revealed a devastating truth. The original agreement had expired 6 months ago, which meant whatever activity had been sanctioned on my grandfather's land Broken Bar was no longer protected by any federal oversight. The ranch was no longer protected under any official contract. "Marcus," Tommy said, his voice tight with concern, "if that equipment's still on your land without a valid agreement, then it's technically considered stolen government property. If Karina or anyone else here reported it, I could be facing serious federal charges." Despite having no knowledge of what had been stored there, the legal consequences were staggering. I could be prosecuted for possessing unauthorized federal assets I hadn't even known existed. The thought of going to prison for decades over something I had no part in was overwhelming. That evening confirmed my growing fears about how deep Karen's investigation had gone. I found a GPS tracker affixed beneath my truck, one used by law enforcement or private investigators. It was expertly installed and had clearly been active for several days. That meant her group had been following my every move across town. Even worse, they had likely entered my property to plant it. They'd probably been inside my garage, possibly searching through my belongings or planting additional surveillance tools. It wasn't just surveillance anymore, it was a full-scale invasion of my privacy and movement. Karen's next move was a bold one. The following morning, I found a document in my mailbox, something that looked like it came straight from a federal agency. It was a citizen's complaint requesting an investigation into suspected terrorist activity, supposedly submitted to the FBI, Department of Homeland Security, and Montana State Police. It was formatted like a legitimate intelligence report, complete with case numbers, formal language, and photographic evidence of my so-called suspicious behavior. While I couldn't confirm whether it had been filed with any government body, the message was clear. Karen was leveraging everything she had to escalate this. She wasn't acting like a neighbor concerned about strange activity. She was launching a full-blown offensive using all the skills she'd acquired in her intelligence career. And I was running out of time to prove that I wasn't the enemy. Sitting in Grandpa's kitchen, staring at that bogus complaint while my phone buzzed with another anonymous threat, it hit me. Karen Grimsley wasn't just acting paranoid. She was operating with the precision of a trained intelligence agent who genuinely believed I was a threat to national security. And in her eyes, I might have looked exactly like that. A software developer from Chicago inheriting a remote ranch loaded with classified surveillance equipment? For someone like Karen, it would trigger every alarm. She wasn't entirely wrong to be suspicious if that's what made it so dangerous. I knew then that I couldn't sit back and wait for this to get worse. I had to take decisive steps to prove my innocence before things escalated beyond the point of no return. Just when I thought I had more time, the confrontation I'd feared finally arrived. It started with the sound of several vehicles rolling into my driveway with the force and formality of an official task force. From the kitchen window, I watched Deputy Morrison step out of his cruiser, followed closely by Karen and two officers I didn't recognize. Karen clutched a leather folder and wore a tactical vest that read Homeland Security Consultant in bold letters across the back. The entire setup had the feel of a sanctioned federal operation. The backup officers, authoritative presence, and even a professional videographer documenting the event. Morrison approached the door, face stern, the way someone looks when they're convinced they're dealing with a dangerous suspect. "Marcus Blackwood," he said, holding up a warrant, "we're authorized to search the premises for evidence of terrorist activity and unlawful weapons storage." The paper bore the Montana District Court seal and was signed by a Judge Patricia Risa, who Karen had apparently convinced that my property was a threat to public safety. "You're required to remain outside during the search," Morrison added. Any interference will result in your immediate arrest. Karen stood just behind him, clearly pleased with how everything was unfolding. She had somehow managed to secure real legal authority to ransack the ranch in search of whatever secrets my grandfather had left behind. The officers moved in sync, heading toward the cattle shed as Karen directed the team like she was running a federal raid rather than a local investigation. She had come fully prepared: bolt cutters for the electronic locks, evidence bags ready for collection, and a live video stream set up that would broadcast the search to her growing online following. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced to the camera, "this is Karen Grimsley, reporting live from what we believe to be a domestic terror storage site. After months of inquiry, we're about to uncover the truth about Marcus Blackwood and what he's been hiding." The viewership counter on her stream climbed past 300 within minutes. Comments flooded in from people across the country, most of whom had been following her investigation and were already convinced of my guilt. As the team cracked open the locked shed doors, a deep unease settled over me. I wasn't sure what they'd find or how they'd interpret it. The military-grade bags were exactly where I'd left them, stacked neatly along the walls, looking like a well-maintained cache from a covert operation. Karen moved in immediately, barking orders, her voice steady and commanding. The officers treated every storage bag as if it held weapons of mass destruction, documenting each one meticulously. Karen addressed her growing online audience with a tone of grim satisfaction. "This is exactly the kind of threat our intelligence sources warned us about," she proclaimed, lifting one of the bags into full view for the cameras. She described the scene like an expert witness at a high-profile trial. Military-grade storage units, flawlessly arranged, each suggesting an active and hidden operation designed to evade detection by law enforcement. The moment she unzipped the first bag, reactions on her live stream surged. Inside were the advanced communication devices I had come across earlier, but Karen spun a darker tale. She claimed they were components of explosive devices, tools for espionage, and equipment used by terrorist cells to coordinate attacks. Holding up a tactical radio, she declared it to be part of a remote detonation system. These could be used to trigger multiple attacks in different cities simultaneously, she warned, her voice steady and alarming. With each comment, she repurposed harmless surveillance tech into something far more dangerous, painting a vivid picture of a homegrown terrorist operation. Her viewers ate it up, spreading the video like wildfire. The search of my property had turned into a nationwide spectacle, one that cast me as an imminent threat to public safety. Deputy Morrison's face grew increasingly strained as more bags were opened. None of the officers present had the expertise to understand the equipment. To the untrained eye, the military tags and security markings appeared ominous, and Karen, with her intelligence background, came across as the only person who truly grasped the threat before them. "This level of sophistication doesn't point to a lone actor," she declared. "This suggests financial backing, coordination, and potential ties to global terror networks." She said it with such conviction that even Morrison was convinced. He called for additional units and began treating the scene as if it were a live terrorism case. The tension reached a breaking point when Karen unzipped the last bag, revealing a complex device bristling with antennas, blinking lights, and a timer counting down a series of numbers. Morrison instinctively reached for his weapon, stepping back in alarm. Karen immediately identified the device as a synchronized detonator, warning that it could be used in a massive, coordinated strike. Her followers went into a frenzy. Comments flooded the stream urging FBI involvement, neighborhood evacuations, and containment measures. And then a voice cut through the chaos, commanding, and impossible to ignore. "Step away from the equipment, hands where I can see them." It came from a woman in a tailored black suit who appeared as if from thin air, flanked by two heavily armed men in tactical gear. She wasn't part of the local police. She carried herself with undeniable authority. Agent Riley Chen had arrived. Flashing her FBI credentials, she addressed the crowd with a tone that silenced the entire room. "This is a classified federal site. You've just compromised an ongoing investigation." Everything stopped. Karen's live stream continued to roll, capturing the exact moment her narrative collided with actual federal enforcement. Confusion swept through her viewers as they tried to understand whether they were watching the takedown of a terrorist or the disruption of a legitimate intelligence mission. The energy shifted instantly. But Karen didn't flinch. If anything, She doubled down. She stepped closer to the camera, eyes locked on her audience. "Just as we suspected," she said, her voice sharpened with resolve. "This is the deep state, moving in to cover up the truth. You're witnessing a government conspiracy unfold live." Her following had ballooned. Over 800 viewers were now watching, reposting, and commenting across platforms. She saw the arrival of federal agents not as proof she was wrong but as confirmation of her deepest fears. Her training had hardened her beliefs to the point where anything official only validated the conspiracy. More agents soon arrived, this time with unmatched efficiency and precision. 3 black SUVs pulled up from different directions, releasing fully equipped federal teams who moved like they were executing a pre-planned operation. In minutes, the area around my ranch was completely locked down. Communication rigs were set up, perimeters secured, and my grandfather's shed was suddenly being treated like a high-level threat site. The difference between these federal agents and Morrison's overwhelmed local force was jarring. It didn't take long for Karen's viewers to start questioning everything they'd believed about her investigation. Agent Chen turned to Morrison, who looked pale and shaken. "This facility was under continuous surveillance," she told him. "Your unapproved entry has jeopardized months of federal work." The arrival of Commander Jack Harrison ended any remaining sense of confusion. He stepped out of a helicopter, clad in full tactical gear, radiating the kind of command presence that suggested he'd been in situations like this before and resolved them decisively. His team swiftly secured the area, though their concern wasn't the equipment Karen had broadcast. Their focus was Karen herself and the damage she'd done by broadcasting sensitive intel to the public. "Ma'am," Harrison said, his voice leaving no room for debate, "you need to shut that stream down, now." She followed orders instantly. "You've just jeopardized a classified counterterrorism mission and possibly endangered both agents and civilians in multiple states," Harrison stated. When Karen insisted on continuing to record, insisting her First Amendment rights were being violated, Harrison simply gave a nod. One of his team members activated a device that disrupted her phone signal, cutting her live stream mid-sentence. The truth of what had been stored inside the cattle shed emerged slowly, and each new detail was more staggering than the last. Agent Chen clarified that the contents weren't bomb components or encrypted messages between terrorists. Instead, it was some of the most advanced counter-surveillance equipment currently available to federal law enforcement. She explained that Operation Silent Eagle had been tracking an international terror network for over 8 months. Karen had unknowingly torn open a critical site used for monitoring cell phone data, internet activity, and financial transactions spanning 3 states. The tools Karen had just broadcast to her audience were among the most confidential assets in the government's national security system. The consequences were immense. Rather than exposing a terrorist conspiracy, Karen had dismantled one of the nation's key counterterrorism efforts. It suddenly made sense why I'd received that anonymous warning about Karen's background and why giving her access to the storage shed had been so risky. Agent Chen then disclosed that Karen had been monitored by the government for more than 6 months, and not because she was a suspect, but because her psychological instability, combined with her background in intelligence work, posed a real security threat. She referenced Operation Desert Ash, which resulted in a dozen federal agents losing their lives due to flawed intel. Karen had been medically retired after that mission, suffering from intense paranoid delusions and an obsessive drive to uncover threats, real or imagined. "We've been observing her," Chen said, her tone clinical, not personal. "Her expertise makes her capable of serious disruption, while her condition prevents her from grasping the consequences of her actions." When Karen finally stopped resisting the SWAT officers escorting her away, her demeanor changed. As they led her toward a black SUV, I caught sight of her expression. The hardened investigator who'd hounded me was gone. What I saw instead was a haunted woman trapped in memories of a mission gone horribly wrong. Agent Chen read details from Karen's file aloud, partly for Morrison, partly for my own understanding. Karen Grimsley, once a threat analyst for the Defense Intelligence Agency, had been discharged after Operation Desert Ash due to fatal analytical missteps. She'd been diagnosed with severe PTSD, paranoid personality disorder, and obsessive-compulsive tendencies centered around threat detection. As they placed her into the SUV, Karen turned toward me and whispered, I was right this time. They said I was crazy after Afghanistan, but I was right about the danger. But it was Harrison's private explanation that truly conveyed the fallout. He pulled me aside and said, "Mr. Blackwood, what your neighbor just live-streamed was equipment designed to track terrorist communications globally. Her exposure of that data means we now have to overhaul ongoing investigations across 17 countries. This may allow real terrorist cells to slip away, and possibly carry out attacks we would have stopped." The gravity of it was unbearable. In trying to protect Americans from imagined dangers, Karen had made the real ones harder to stop. Her desperate need to be the one who uncovered a hidden threat had, tragically, turned her into one. As federal agents worked to remove the now compromised equipment, I stood there realizing that everyone had been both right and wrong. Karen was correct in sensing something serious was hidden at my ranch, but her assumptions about its nature were far off. The federal operation had every reason to stay secret, but the trauma inflicted on former operatives like Karen had clearly gone unaddressed. And me, I was caught in the crossfire of a battle between past trauma and present necessity, where even good intentions could create catastrophic consequences. The fallout from Karen's broadcast played out like a tightly managed federal cleanup, but what came to light afterward was even more surprising. A few days after the operation ended, Agent Chen returned for a private conversation that reshaped everything I thought I knew about Karen, about my grandfather, and about the truth behind the cattle shed. She sat at my kitchen table with the worn look of someone used to keeping secrets. "Operation Silent Eagle isn't active anymore," she admitted. "It concluded successfully over a month ago. The final arrests in an international arms ring were made. The equipment in your shed was temporarily stored here, waiting to be reassigned to future operations." Karen's actions had forced their hand, exposing tools the agency had hoped to keep hidden for years. As for my grandfather, the truth was simpler and far more admirably than any of the theories Karen had imagined. Xavier Blackwood had worked with the CIA during the Cold War, yes, but in his later years, his role was logistical. He'd offered his ranch as a secure storage site not for secret missions, but to aid national defense efforts quietly. Chen showed me the documents. For 15 years, the ranch had been a discreet stopover point for sensitive gear between operations across the West. He didn't know what was being stored, nor did he need to. His value was in providing a safe, off-the-grid location the government could trust. The payments I had discovered were nothing more than rental fees for space on private land, an agreement with a loyal patriot, not a spy. As for Karen's fate, it wasn't as dire as I feared when Harrison first spoke of consequences. People vanished. Agent Chen eventually disclosed that instead of facing charges for breaching national security, Karen was being transferred to a federal medical facility specializing in treating ex-intelligence officers suffering from psychological trauma. The Walter Reed National Military Medical Center has an entire division dedicated to helping former analysts and agents recover from the mental toll of their service. Chen's tone held genuine empathy. Despite the fact she'd had to treat Karen as a national threat, she explained that Karen's condition was not rare among those who had spent their careers hunting dangers that most civilians would never even imagine. Operation Desert Ash hadn't been Karen's fault, but losing 12 teammates left deep emotional scars, creating behavioral patterns that made adjusting to civilian life nearly impossible. In my case, the government responded with a mix of formal apologies and meaningful restitution and acknowledgement of how badly the situation had been mishandled. FBI Director Sarah Morrison, unrelated to the local deputy, personally signed a letter admitting federal authorities should have given me proper context regarding the classified storage site. Instead, I had stumbled into it blind, with no support or explanation. The financial settlement I received was enough to eliminate the mortgage on the ranch and invest in major upgrades. More importantly, I was invited to carry forward my grandfather's legacy by overseeing the facility as a sanctioned federal storage location with security clearance and official oversight built in. Deputy Morrison's own journey served as proof that sincere accountability could turn missteps into progress. After completing rigorous federal training in identifying and validating classified operations, he earned a promotion to detective and became the federal liaison for our area. His experience with Karen's case had given him perspective on the intricate nature of national security and the necessity of fact-checking before making assumptions. I should have asked how a civilian came across sensitive intelligence about classified operations, he told me during one of our later conversations. Karen presented herself so convincingly, her credentials checked out, so I took her word as truth. I see now that even good people with solid backgrounds can make dangerous choices when trauma skews their reality. The community's reaction was a powerful mix of disappointment and resilience. As the truth surfaced, many of Karen's followers of the so-called Meadowbrook Truth Warriors publicly admitted they'd been misled. A number of them shifted gears, becoming vocal supporters of increased mental health services for veterans and ex-government personnel. Bob Martinez, Linda Chen, and Dave Peterson all came to my ranch personally to apologize for their involvement in what they now recognized as the unraveling of a troubled mind, not a righteous security mission. Karen had us convinced, Bob said. Her background, her delivery, everything felt authentic. She made us believe we were defending our town, but really, we were feeding into her breakdown. The most touching moment came half a year later when I received a handwritten letter from Karen, sent from the facility where she was now in treatment. Her handwriting was more stable than I remembered, and her words carried the kind of clarity that only comes with healing. Marcus, I truly believed I was protecting innocent people from a terrorist plot, she wrote. My therapy has helped me realize how my experiences in Afghanistan wired my brain to see threats where none existed. I'm so sorry for the hurt I caused it for undermining the very security work I thought I was safeguarding. I'm getting better. I hope that someday, I can contribute to public safety in a way that heals instead of harms. Inside the envelope, she had included a small watercolor of the Montana hills visible from my land. It was signed, simply, K. Grimsley. Learning to see again. 1 year on, my life had found balance. I was splitting my time between software work and managing the now official federal site. My bond with Agent Chen had deepened, grounded in mutual respect and shared challenges. What began as a professional connection gradually turned into something more meaningful. Tommy Rodriguez, meanwhile, had accepted a role as a cybersecurity consultant for the same federal program and relocated to Montana. He helped manage the digital infrastructure of the facility, turning our once chaotic property into a well-run partnership between private citizens and the government. That land, once a hotspot for confusion and conflict, had become a shining example of what cooperation could look like when transparency, training, and honest communication come first. As I type this for Harper Stories, I'm back on that porch where Karen Grimsley first walked into my life, staring out at the barn that now safely holds federal tech with my full awareness and support. The lesson here isn't about good defeating evil, because Karen wasn't evil, she was damaged by things she couldn't control. The real takeaway is that sometimes, the people we see as threats are actually fighting battles we'll never understand, and that justice, when guided by compassion, sometimes looks more like healing than punishment. Have you ever felt like someone was watching your every move, waiting for you to slip up? We've all known that neighbor or coworker who seems obsessed with control, but what if their desire to protect others ends up wrecking everything? Karen's story is a reminder that the ones we fear might be the ones most in need of care. If this story of fear, redemption, and unexpected truth struck a chord with you, show Just Stories your support by liking and subscribing. Your encouragement allows us to share more narratives that explore the gray areas of justice, where healing matters more than revenge. Thanks for watching another episode of Pwn Guide. If no one in your neighborhood has tried to sell you a boat yet, count yourself lucky. If they have, well, welcome to the club. Drop your own horror story in the comments. And remember, Stories is always watching. Stay tuned. And be careful before Karen files another complaint about mailbox paint.